Welcome to the Sober Unicorn. We are a gay-hosted, all-inclusive podcast about sobriety and addiction recovery for the LGBT plus community and all of our allies. I am your host, Holden, and thank you for joining us today. Hey everybody, it's Holden back here again with the Sober Unicorn. I hope everybody is having an incredible week so far, and if you're not, hopefully it gets better. Today we have another guest joining us today. We met each other via Instagram. I believe you were one of my first followers actually on Instagram, so it's actually great to actually get you on. So everybody say hello to Jim. How are you, Jim? How are you
Glad
doing?
to be here. And I'm well, and I did not know that I was one of your first followers on your Instagram, so it's an honor to hear that.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. So why don't you kind of give everybody like who you are, what your drug of choice was, and how long you've been sober?
Absolutely. So my name is Jim. I am a gay man living in Memphis, Tennessee, and I would say I had multiple drugs of choice, but the one that's most prevalent to this conversation would be alcohol, particularly whiskey and red wine. And as of this recording, I am 22 months and 1 day sober. I just celebrated 22 months sober from all alcohol yesterday. And I am grateful for that. But I've also been in, done a lot of work around cat. I've done a lot of work around things like compulsive sexual behavior and addictive families, but alcohol was my primary drug of choice.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I think as I've previously stated, it seems like the younger generation is mostly cross addicted. That like alcohol wasn't the only poison that we endured. I know for me, I probably need to go to sex addicts and do other things as well because during my stint of meth, that was very prevalent within that addiction. So why don't you kind of like tell everybody a small backstory? I mean, how like what brought you into addiction or feel brought you into the addiction, and then at what point was it the final straw to say that you need to get sober?
Sure. So I was raised in an alcoholic home. My father was the alcoholic. My mother was the one who enabled his alcoholism and bought all the alcohol for the house. My father was also a Vietnam War veteran, so he had a combat-related PTSD that went untreated. His father was also an alcoholic, so I come from a lineage of that. And there was never a night in my house growing up where alcohol was not out, open, visible, and being consumed by my family. I remember being fed little bits of alcohol by my dad when I was 12, 13 years old. He would always say, "Oh, just get a taste of this," or "Here's what good alcohol tastes like," or "Here's what horrible alcohol tastes like." And because I totally did that thing where when I went off to college, I did not drink until I turned 21. I totally did that thing where I'm not dependent on alcohol because I'm being a good boy. I'm not drinking until the law says I can. And I'm not drinking like all the other people are drinking, like all the frat boys on campus, they're getting more drunk than I am. Certainly not drinking the way my dad did. So I can't have a problem with alcohol. Look at what everybody else is doing compared to me. Also, too, growing up gay in a military household, growing up gay in South Central Texas, I thought I was the only gay person around. I was certainly the only gay kid that I knew. So my only exposure to any kind of gay life was pornography. As you know, at about the same age I was being introduced to alcohol, 13 years old. So that quickly became my drug of choice on the front end. And eventually, particularly after my dad died, right after I graduated from college, that's where my private pornography compulsion was mingling with my increasingly public drunkenness. So, which is to say, I would drink a lot out in public and then come home and watch a lot of pornography till 2, 3 in the morning. And this went on for years and years. About 6, 7 years ago, I started going to therapy, and I was much more vocal and willing to talk about my compulsive sexual behaviors that were putting me at harm. This is not to say I'm sex negative or we need to be a puritanical prude. I know for those of us in the queer community, this can be a lot of dog whistle politics. This was straight up, I was putting myself in a lot of danger. And I was using sex and sexuality to my impairment. So I was much more willing to talk about that on the front end in therapy. Went into some 12-step programs and worked the steps around that. And found a lot of healing and found a lot of just groundedness and finding a more holistic and healthy approach to my queer sexuality. But then I was never really addressing my alcohol use. Again, I was doing the comparison game. I'm not drinking like other people are drinking. But about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, so maybe 2016, 2017, I started doing dry Januaries, 30 days, no alcohol in January. And I would always say, like, oh, I drank too much over the holidays. I need to reset. And what would happen every dry January is the first week would be a lot of headaches, right? Like getting the withdrawal symptoms out. And then about halfway through dry January, I would think, actually, I kind of like how this feels as a sober person, or at least as a person not drinking. And I would talk to my therapist about that. And there would be some questions about maybe I should keep doing this. Maybe I potentially have a problematic relationship with alcohol. But at the end of dry January, I would always do the same thing. I'm going to moderate my drinking, 4 drinks a week. That's it. We're done. But the problem, Holden, is every single time I did that, it was not maybe a couple weeks later where I would get through, halfway through February and I'm like, oh, what's 5 drinks? Who cares? What's 6 drinks a week? Who cares? Right. I just kept adding. And then all of a sudden my attempts to moderate were gone. This would happen year in, year out, year in, year out. And then, of course, the COVID pandemic struck. We're all stuck at home. And somewhere around summer of 2020, that is where I began to realize I don't like my relationship with alcohol. And my therapist doesn't like my relationship with alcohol. And I realized that I was doing this kind of calculus of if I drink 2 drinks here, then that means I get to have 2 drinks there. And it was just really, locked at home by yourself in the early pandemic. It was getting to be a lot. So I'd say the final straw was actually 2 years ago. It was 2 years ago, Labor Day weekend. This might have been the second to last final straw. I said to myself, I'm going to do another 30 days, but this time I'm going to be really mindful about what is it like for me not to drink, and how does drinking affect my life? So in those 30, that actually became 60 days of not drinking in September, October 2020. I read this book called This Naked Mind by Annie Grace. Other sober curious people had read it. They said it kind of changed their life and their approach to alcohol. And I was telling my therapist, who I still work with now, about that book and what I was learning. And she was asking me, my therapist was asking me to think about how much money do you spend on alcohol and how much time do you spend on alcohol? And that's when I realized that my yearly expenditures on alcohol had a comma in it. That's how much money I was spending. I took a little 3-day trip to Chattanooga, Tennessee, in October 2020, and it was my first sober trip. And I realized by not drinking on that trip over 3 days, I saved about $300. So that's where I began to kind of like count the literal cost of my drinking. But the final straw, the absolute final straw, Holden, was on November the 6th, 2020, which was the day that it was announced that Trump lost the election and that President Biden was now, at that time, president-elect. And I told myself I was going to celebrate that occasion by having 2 drinks. My 2 drinks very quickly turned to at least 6 drinks in the course of one night that I lost count of. So it was probably more. And I woke up the next morning to the worst headache of my life and a phone call from my neighbor who I was drinking with saying that I had been exposed to COVID by him. And that's when I decided this hangover and this exposure to COVID and everything that I just learned about myself in the last 2 months that I threw out the window in one night of drinking, it's got to stop. Like, I don't know if I've crossed the point into alcohol dependency yet, but I'm no longer willing to find out. And I know who my dad was and what he struggled with. And I've heard the stories of what his dad struggled with. So we're done. Like, we're not doing this anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that's insane how you discuss like the money involved. Because when I finally quit drinking, it was maybe about 4 months after that. I was like, I started realizing the money in my bank just kept growing, or that I was able to actually go out to dinner with friends and be able to afford my dinner and have no issues. And I was like, I sat down and calculated it. I was spending close to like fifteen to $20,000 a year drinking. And I was, because of course I was spending at least $200, $100 to $200 a night at a bar 5 nights a week. And I was like, holy shit! Like the amount of vacation. Of course, I love to travel. The amount of vacations I could have gone on while traveling, the amount of cultural activities, whether it's ballet, the opera, that I could have done, just but I chose liquor over that. So where you said South Texas, where are you from in South Texas?
Born and raised in San Antonio.
Same here, actually.
No kidding.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, what school? Yeah, how crazy is that? What part of town did you grow up in?
So I grew up in the Northeast side. I went to Madison High School.
So I grew up in the Northeast Independent School District. And if I had gone public, I would have gone to Churchill.
Oh, okay, okay,
So
yeah.
you
That
and
was
me would have been rivals.
yeah, but hey, not as bad of a rival as Madison and MacArthur. Those two, like the M&M Bowl.
Or as Churchill and Clark.
That is true. That is true. Yeah, I grew up there to turn 18, moved to California for a boy, back to Texas. Now I'm in Fort Worth, and then I will probably be moving to Georgia or Tennessee in January. And talking about Chattanooga, funny enough, I will be in Chattanooga um, next month.
It's a great town.
I that's I'm actually going with a friend to and look at some apartments. But anyways, but yeah, that's insane that we're both from San Antonio. Um, so back to the drinking.
Yeah, back to the topic.
Back to the topic. Oh my god, I literally just lost my train of thought of where I was going with that. So of course you read The Naked Mind. I actually have that same author's book in my drawer right now of the 30-day alcohol experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Haven't read it, haven't opened it, but I bought it. So that's the first step. How, like, for anybody that doesn't know what The Naked Mind is, like what does that book entail for people?
Yeah. So Annie Grace, the author, she makes it clear that she's not an addiction specialist. She's a journalist. And primarily the book is her own journey into sobriety, mixed in with through her own journalistic skills, the research and interviews that she had done. So she talks a lot about some of the statistics around alcohol. She talks about how, as of the writing of that book, alcohol consumption and alcohol related deaths. So think of like deaths by drunk drivers. Alcohol related deaths are the number one killer of Americans, at least as of the publication of that book. And that one of the things that really struck me about the thing that she wrote was that, people will say that, oh, I love the taste of alcohol. So like we're coming up on pumpkin spice season, right? And I got a buddy who loves his pumpkin spice beers. And he was like, I just drink it because I love the taste of pumpkin spice. And I could be like with my whiskey that I used to drink, like I could taste it or I could drink it because I love the taste of whatever. And Annie Grace writes in the book that alcohol, like the chemical substance that make up alcohol, is an addictive substance. So are you really enjoying the taste of alcohol, or are you literally just hooked on an addictive substance? If we were to strip away whatever flavor additives have been added to an alcoholic beverage, would you still enjoy that drink? And I know that the answer for me is no. Because on the flip side, as I've experimented with, drinking, alcohol-free mocktails, I'm like, this, even if it kind of sort of tastes like an old fashioned, this is not an old fashioned, and I don't like it. So it was kind of a wake-up call for me that a lot of the justifications that I would use to drink, whether it was, oh, I just enjoy the taste. No, you didn't enjoy the taste. You enjoyed the alcoholic addictive substance. Or, oh, I don't drink like other people do. Well, your alcohol consumption shouldn't be based on what other people are doing. But I would say the thing that she wrote about the most in that book, or at least that I resonated with the most in that book, was her consistent, repetitive talking about the management game and how much of a mental drain it was. So it was like reading my story. She would talk about how if I would manage, this is Annie talking, if I would manage trying to have only 6 drinks a week, then everything became a kind of accountancy game of, okay, if I have 3 drinks with this friend here, then that means I can have 2 drinks later on down the road. And everything just kind of becomes that build up expectation of when do I get to have my next drink? And I read that, I was like, I do this all the time, or I did. And I could go back to my journals. I'm a very active journaler, and I could see in writing my own justification for why I could go past that point. And Annie Grace writes about, because alcohol is such an addictive substance, you'll never win the management game. Like, you can fool yourself into thinking you can, but eventually, sooner or later, you will not be able to keep up whatever management chess you're playing. The alcohol is going to win. And I just had to be honest with myself after 4, 5, 6 years of dry Januaries and the commitments I made myself to manage my alcohol intake, and then how I would justify myself out of it. It's like, okay, the literal track record in my journals tells me I am unable to maintain my own alcohol drinking, just like this book and her experience says.
That talking about managing it, at one point in my drinking, I would every drink I had, I would keep the straw in the same glass. So then at some point in my drunken night, I could count how many drinks I had for the evening. So I could be like, okay, only 10 or 15 for the night. Which for many people seems like a lot, but for somebody like an alcoholic, that's not that many. And it got to the point where I was like so drunk, but then I like there's so many straws in my glass, I just like, instead of thinking to myself, there's a shit ton of straws in here, you need to stop drinking. It was, oh shit, there's a lot of straws, let me just take them out and throw them away. And then I lost count. And then the next morning, when you're waking up and hungover with a headache, having to go to work the next day, you're just like, how did I let myself get to this point? And it's that I mean, for God, almost 2 years, I was like wanting to quit drinking, and I was like, I can't keep doing this myself. But yet, like you said, you find a celebratory reason, just
Yeah.
like Trump losing the presidency for yourself. Like, I, whether it was being pissed off at a coworker, whether it was celebrating a small victory in that day, like no matter what happened, we always would find a reason to drink. And it wasn't like, for me at least, it wasn't a real reason. It was my brain wanting that addictive chemical, stating just anything possible just to give myself that excuse to now give back to my addiction.
Yeah.
So in your recovery, of course, the topic of the episode is that you're not alone. Um, how was the support? Like, let's start with the support actually from your close friends, like your drinking buddies. So when you chose to get sober, how was the support from them?
Yeah, so my early sobriety, and by early sobriety, I'm going to say the first 5 to 6 months of sobriety, would have been from November of 2020 to April of 2021. So most Americans from November 2020 to April 2021 were once again stuck at home because the vaccine for COVID wasn't widely available. And, we had that horrible winter surge, that first COVID winter. So I was by myself. I live alone, with the exception of the cat who introduced herself at the beginning of this episode. And I had my little quarantine pod that I hung out with, 2 other friends. So they knew, and we used to drink together, but I would argue, and I think I can safely say this, our drinking rarely went into crazy territory. So I would say they didn't enable my drinking. And therefore, when I told them, it, I'm laughing, and I'll tell you why in a hot second. Let me finish the statement. When I told them that I was done with alcohol, they were very supportive of it. The reason why I'm laughing is because these same people were the last people that I drank with. They were the people that I was celebrating the end of Trump's presidency with. So, and they know that. I'm just laughing at the humor of the situation that I just said. I don't think they enabled my drinking, but they were also the last people I drank with. So, anyway, Brian and Sarah, they're their names. And yeah, they were supportive. My therapist, of course, was basically like, finally. So there we were doing our telehealth sessions online. But that was it. I'm a piano teacher. All my piano lessons were online. The only time I left my house that winter was I know, Holden, you can see this right now, but your listeners can't. I got this massive shoulder and chest tattoo that winter. And me and my tattoo artist, we would just mask up. We would do our sittings. We did it 4 times that winter. And that was it. That was the extent of my social interaction. So very early sobriety. Um, the way that the support that I received was from 2 very good friends here in Memphis, Brian and Sarah, a couple other friends scattered around the country that I could text with, and my therapist. Um, and because none of my friends were really going out anyway in that winter, it kind of just felt like we all had a pause on the outgoing partying. But Holden, when we started getting back together in April 2021, as more and more of my friends got vaccinated, none of them knew except for Brian and Sarah and my therapist and my tattoo artist. um, and so I remember the very first in-person gathering we had, April of 2021, was actually for a friend's 2-year-old birthday party that was advertised as, "Our daughter's turning 2, come have cake and beer." Like, that was literally on the invitation. And I'm like, okay. So I go, and other than Brian and Sarah, who are at this party, no one knows that I'm not drinking anymore, or I made that commitment. And I was angry, Holden. Like, 5 months sober, I had heard the warnings that somewhere around 5, 6 months sober, you're just infuriated at the world, and it happened to me. So pent up energy from being cooped up in the house all winter by myself. Um, Going out in public for the first time where alcohol is on the invitation card, but no one knows that I'm sober. Uh, and I'm looking at everybody going, who are these fuckers that think that they can drink and I can't? And they're seeing that I don't have a drink in my hand. I cannot tell you how disorienting it was for me to not have a drink in my hand at my first social gathering. It really was. And I sat that entire little birthday party thinking, these people know that something's wrong with me, something's messed up with me. Why am I not drinking? That's what they're thinking. Oh my God. And I was just angry at everybody. And I think I didn't so much yell at my therapist as if it were her fault. But when I saw her in my session after that, I was basically yelling in her direction. So yeah, it really was on the topic of you are not alone. I appreciate what you said in our pre-record talk that in sobriety, sometimes we recovering folks feel like we have to be alone because if somebody knew that I was sober, the first thing they're going to think of is there's something wrong with Jim. What's wrong with Jim? I didn't want people to know that. So I didn't tell people for a long time that I was not drinking. So yeah, I'm grateful for the small number of friends that I did have who supported it because I deprived myself of more real support for until basically about 9 months to a year into my current sobriety.
I mean, it's great that you had that experience because I actually had quite the opposite with close friends. I mean, I got sober after COVID. I mean, well, whatever. I mean, kind of in the we're still dealing with COVID, but during COVID we had a same thing pod, but it was like 20 of us, um, and that's when my alcoholism really fueled because my friend had the pool, and so we would all meet over there. And I mean, we're in Texas, and we like to drink. And when I finally got sober, because I was seeing these people 5 to 7 nights a week, because Texas opened up their bars and everything pretty quickly, in the midst of everything. So finally, my friends kept inviting me out, and I kept telling them, "No, I'm good, I'm good." And then finally, after maybe like a week sober, I just had to tell them like, "Hey, I've quit drinking. Like, I've chose to go to a 12-step program." And they're like, "Well, what? Are you kidding me?" I'm like, "No, bitch." And they're like, "Well, just don't drink as much." I'm like, okay, that doesn't work for me." She's like, "Well, can't you just have a couple?" I'm like, again, that doesn't work for me. So it took me finally kind of, as you said, you were yelling at your therapist or towards the therapist, not at her. Um, Me having that real heart to heart with a certain friend of mine because I finally had to break it down. I was like, this doesn't work. It's either all or nothing. I'm like, I've tried to go to the bar. I said, do you not realize how many times I've driven blacked out home? I said, and at that time I was living like 25 minutes away from the bar. So I was putting my life as well as other people's lives in danger just to be able to drink. And it's like, she's like, oh, I never realized it got that bad. Well, of course, because you were drunk and already at home by 10 p.m. And I was at the bar till 2 in the morning, going to an after party, not getting home till 6 a.m. So of course she didn't realize it was that bad. So the support for me came later with the friends than I had hoped for. Um, but my main support system came from um, the people in recovery in itself. Because a lot of people, when they are in their addiction, they isolate themselves, especially kind of towards the very end of their drinking careers. They are sitting at home, just completely intoxicated, bottles all over the place. Like my one of our guests, Charlie, when he got home from a rehab, he literally just had bottles, like 50, 60 bottles just empty in his house. Um, and like you said, some people when they go into recovery feel that they have to fully isolate to stay away from a bar, stay away from a restaurant, stay away from any other temptation, which isn't reality because drinks and alcohol is everywhere in our society.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're on every damn billboard, which gives me FOMO sometimes because I'm just like, ooh, Mountain Dew is about to release a seltzer, or Sonic just released one, and so on. But when you drive, like next time you drive, I don't know if y'all have a lot of billboards in your town, but when you drive, pay attention to those billboards. You do not realize how many of them are surrounding about alcohol. So for you did work a few programs, including the, of course, alcoholic 12-step program as well as the sex program. How did you find the support within the program?
Yeah. So I would say, ironically, most of my 12-step work happened before I got sober from alcohol. And I would like to think that what I learned in those 12-step programs and what I learned about myself carried over into building my own support network here. So, and by here, I mean just among my circle of friends who I trust. Um, Particularly in S-based or sex-based, sex and romance-based 12-step programs. Sex-based addiction is what's called a process addiction. It's not like a substance addiction to alcohol where you can just stop drinking. It's not that easy, but it is kind of that simple, right? There's a difference. Stop drinking, get the support, do something different. But a sex addiction, like, you can't live without intimacy. You need intimacy. You need relationships of some kind in your life to thrive. So what I had to learn through the 12 steps was just a right sizedness, right? Like I think through so much of my addiction, I simultaneously thought, I am the shit better than everybody else, and I am a piece of shit who is so much worse than everybody else. Which is to say, I don't fit in anywhere because I'm either looking down from you from my pedestal, or I'm in the trenches, wishing I could just be with you. I had to learn. I had a couple of great sponsors in my S-based programs who were welcoming of me as a gay man, even though they were straight married men. But they, were very willing to just take me at my own terms and take me at my own pace, and just help me to see through the steps that no, I am a good man. I'm a good person, and I just had a really shitty solution to the trauma and problems of my life. And in my S-based 12-step work, it was compulsive sexual behaviors. What I also know now is it was also problematic drinking. Um, so it was a lot of just making amends with myself, forgiving myself, reclaiming and honoring my own queerness on my own terms. That goes beyond sexual preference and sexual acts, but into a more holistic view of myself. Um, what I would also say the 12 steps, particularly 12-step programs, gave me in regards to both S-based programs, but also 12-step programs for family members of alcoholics, was places just to talk about, like, this is the stuff I've done. This is the stuff I've experienced in my addiction. This is the stuff I've done and experienced with my traumas from my family, from outside of that. I've heard it said that sunlight is the best disinfectant. So to be able to share what I thought were the secrets I was going to take to my grave with other people, and to hear them say, me too, or I've done something similar, or I felt that before. I was like, oh, well, I am not that piece of shit who can't belong, or, oh, I'm not the shit who can't mingle with you lowly peasants. Oh, we're all in this together. I was already beginning to step out of the 12-step rooms right before COVID got came into America. But then when COVID struck, I was like, I'm just gonna take some time for myself. But through working the other steps of taking my inventory, sharing that inventory with others, beginning the process of 8th and 9th step amends making, I since then have been able to apply those principles. Like I just went to Montana a month ago, reconnected with an old friend, like 17-year friendship, but we had been estranged for 12 years. And through the principles of 12 step and through my sobriety, this kind of an amends was me saying to him, a former mentor, this is how you hurt me. And my shit was, I let that wound keep me away from you for 12 years. Like your words hurt, but I also hid. And like through our sobriety and through our wellness, like we reconciled, and like I've got this great friend back in my life after 12 years of silence. So I would say the steps, they helped me to make amends with myself. They helped me to make a more healthy and holistic form of spirituality that not just includes my queerness, but celebrates it and nurtures it, and sees my queerness as a foundation to my spirituality with my higher power. The 12 steps gave me a process to be in healthier, more mature relationships with other people. I've heard it said in 12-step rooms that if sobriety is stopping your addiction, then recovery is doing something different. And I really have taken that to heart over the years.
That's how I feel about being dry compared to being in recovery. Dry is not just dry is being just not drinking or not using, while recovery is actually working on the trauma or the issues that caused you to do the addiction or to use or to drink. Like it makes you understand what you were escaping or trying to hide and bring that to light and allows you to work through that. Same thing. There was a few things that I thought was going to take to my grave, and working through the inventory of a 12-step program, I was like, oh, I'm not telling my sponsor this shit. Like, I can't tell anybody. And finally, I was like, if you're not 100% honest with this person, like, you're going to go back to drinking. You won't succeed. And so I was fully honest, and he's like, really, that's it? Like, that's what you thought was so bad that you had to take to your grave? And I was like, oh, great, okay. So I mean, and it's, yeah, I mean, you go into these rooms thinking, I thought I was better than everybody, considering that I had a very high bottom. I didn't go to jail, I never had to go to rehab, I never had to go through like a detox treatment center. But then going into these rooms, I realized that I hadn't had to do any of those things yet, because at some point in my addiction, like I only didn't go through that shit because I never got caught. The amount of times I would have had a DUI, I probably had like my license stripped. I would have been broke as hell, probably homeless for the fact of having to pay all the DUI fees. I mean, so I'm incredibly thankful and grateful for the fact of I haven't had to experience those, and now realize that just because I didn't experience those doesn't mean I'm any better or less than any other person that is still struggling with their addiction um, and their recovery. So what, because of course you work several programs, you work the sex program as well as a 12-step AA and a the family of alcoholics. So what tools do you carry with you the most to this day?
Yeah. So the tools and practices that I use the most to honor and nourish my sobriety and ongoing recovery would be a journal. I've been journaling since 2005. Just wrote in it yesterday, actually. So that's been a place for me where, whether it's verbal vomit, get some anger out on the page before it turns into a resentment, or whether it's just a chronicle of whatever I did for the day. Like that's been a really neutral place for me to just be honest with myself first before I start being honest with other people. I'm a physically active bear, so like I just got back from the pool swimming laps before I did this recording. I'm a cyclist. Drunk the CrossFit Kool-Aid in December after many years of telling myself I wasn't going to do it. I got bamboozled by a buddy of mine in Chicago. He took me to the gym, and it was my first CrossFit workout. And I was like, Andrew. And I fell in love. So physical fitness is important to me. I'm a musician, both professionally, primarily professionally, but I mean, my piano's my outlet. Like to be able to just doodle my feelings out with improvisations or whatever. Like it's great. So yeah, the tools that I use for myself within myself would be journaling, physical fitness, whether with others or myself, and then music, the listening and performing of it. And then my therapist, I still go. And I would also say just having a supported network of friends who honor and nourish my sobriety with me.
It's crazy to see. I of course being the host of the podcast, you're my like 46th guest, and there is a ton of the guests that have these major creative outlets, whether it's writing, painting, music, um, or even fitness as well. So it's crazy that we find these major creative outlets, either in our addiction or even like after our addiction. I know painting for me started like in active addiction in 2020, but now has become an outlet for me now through my sobriety and helps my journey as well. So alcoholics and addicts tend to be some of like these most creative, open-minded individuals that don't um I think it's because we don't shield anything from our minds.
Right.
We're most of them very open minded and willing to have any kind of conversation possible because we've already had these hard ass conversations from our past with strangers.
Right.
So so it's
Yeah.
not difficult to have it with friends. So
As a scholar of music history, I can tell you some of our greatest composers would have benefited from 12-step rooms.
so is there anything we you haven't shared that you would like to share with everybody?
Yeah. Speaking of music and creative outlets, this is something in my sobriety that I'm very much excited for. A week from tomorrow, so September 17th, I will be doing my first concert, singing my first concert since Christmas of 2019. Thank you, COVID. Finally, we're getting back on stage. But more importantly, it will be my first time to give a concert to be on stage as a sober man. And which is not to say that I was drunk on stage. There were a few casual music performances, in bars where I was drinking. But for the classical music concert performance, I was always sober beforehand, or should I say dry. This is my first time to be in the rehearsal process and give a concert where I'm sober, and I've never done that before. The post concert party and drinking, like that was and for the other people in the ensemble will continue to be a very real thing. I'm super excited that this year, we are going to be performing the music of, her name is Jennifer Higdon. She's a queer Pulitzer Prize winning composer. And the thing that I will be craving the most after that concert is, sure, going to the same dive that we always go to, but I will be taking a full plate of cheese fries for myself. Thank you. You can have your own. Get your own pitcher of beer. I don't care. So I'm just really excited to know what it's like doing my craft that I've done my entire life, but to do it as a sober man for the very first time.
The only thing that would scare me, I mean, of course, I don't want to like psych you out beforehand, is alcohol helps try to knock off that edge of possible like stage fright and overthinking. And of course, me in a full mindset of soberness, like I overthink and overanalyze everything. So that would be I think for me, the only scary part is like overthinking as like every step goes on in a performance.
Sure. Yeah. And I know for me, like I always, this is part, I'm realizing this may have been part of my justification all along. I never drank before a concert. Never, never. But ask me how many drinks I would have after a concert, and the limit did not exist. Right. So what I need to be mindful of is I know why I drank after the concert. I wanted to keep that energy going, like that concert stage high we always get, regardless of how the performance went. Like I wanted to keep that high going. What will it look like this time to let those post-concert endorphins run their natural course, be in community with the other musicians, but to also be like, hey, when I'm done, like when I've had my plate of cheese fries, I'm done. I'm going home. Like we're not carrying this on until 11 o'clock at night, midnight, and beyond. Like the bear's tired. We're done.
It'll be fun though to watch everybody else get completely annihilated, and you just sit in a corner happy with your cheese fries.
Yeah, right.
And like, oh, ladies, y'all are just so happy that I'm not joining y'all tonight.
The altos have gone off, and this baritone is happy with his cheese fries. Thank you.
Exactly. So, if anybody resonated with your story or has any further questions for you, how can they reach you?
Yeah, so they can find me on Instagram. My full name is Jim Cornfoot. I'm the only one on there, I'm pretty sure. And my Instagram handle is jcorn104.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for joining us today.
Thank you. It was great to be here, Holden.
Awesome. You have a wonderful day, okay?
You too.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you again for listening to today's episode. Hit that follow button to be notified about new episodes every week. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can find us on Instagram at The Sober Unicorn Podcast or on our website at thesoberunicornpodcast.com. There you will find our episodes as well as our very own sober-owned shop featuring products from small businesses that are sober-owned. And remember everyone, don't be normal, be a unicorn, but better yet, be a sober unicorn.